Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Juniper. I'm the managing producer for Feldenkrais Access, and I'm very happy to be here with David Zemach-Bersin. Hi, David.
Hi, Juniper.
We're live on YouTube and Facebook right now, so welcome to those of you who've joined us from those platforms. We're waiting just a minute because we're going live on Instagram as well, and that will take a minute. And in the meantime, please do write into the chat and submit any questions that you might have for David about his upcoming workshop, Activate Your Power Center. David, is there anything you'd like to say before we get started?
Only that I'm very, very excited to be doing this workshop and to be sharing lessons that I have been thinking about, working on, and developing for quite a few years now.
Awesome. Well, we are live on Instagram, so welcome everyone. Again, I'm Juniper. I'm the managing producer for Feldenkrais Access, and this is the live chat with David to take your questions or comments and talk about his upcoming workshop, Activate Your Power Center. David, I have a kind of question for you, which is, why have you decided to teach an entire 2 days of workshop about one lesson?
Well, that's an interesting question, Juniper, and a very good question. Firstly, it's not one lesson. I'll be teaching probably a total of 6 to 8 lessons during the 2 days. And it is a lesson, the pelvic clock is a lesson that Dr. Feldenkrais created very early on in the development of the Feldenkrais method. And it is an extremely powerful and generative lesson. And by generative, I mean that it leads, the basic lesson leads to many other lessons. And the basic lesson also leads us to see fine details within it. And that's exactly what I'll be doing in this workshop, is not teaching. We actually won't work directly with the original lesson by Dr. Feldenkrais. We'll kind of expand it and look at it in a more granular way. So and I just would like to say that I think expanding the lesson is extremely potent in terms of its effect on any activity that we do. And by any, I mean from walking to breathing, at as wide a range as that, from sitting to using our arms. So in fact, when I think about the applications of the lessons that we'll be doing in those 2 days on the weekend, I could pitch to you that these are incredible lessons for improving the freedom and the symmetrical movement of our hip joints, which is, of course, extremely important. Usually when someone has wear and tear in their hip joints, most often it's one hip joint. Why is it one hip joint? Because that leg is being used excessively as the standing leg. And so there's much more wear and tear in that hip joint. But at the same time, as something as large in scope as walking and the health of our hip joints, these lessons will have an incredible benefit for people who do fine motor activities, like a violinist, a pianist. Why? Because the better organized is the center of ourselves, the better organized or integrated are the movements of our pelvis, with our actions, with our general organization, posture, well, then the lighter my arms can be. So I use these ideas a great deal when I work with musicians, and it has tremendous benefit.
And David, could you say something further and elaborate on your ideas around the power center that the workshop refers to?
Sure. I chose the word power intentionally because when we look at the biomechanics of movement, we find that the largest muscles of ourselves, by far the largest muscles, are all attached to our pelvis. They're all attached to the center of ourselves. And so that would mean by inference, and in fact, it turns out to be true we can see it is true through research, that the more the center of myself, the more the center of myself is involved in my activities, the more efficient, powerful, potent can I be. So for example, if you take something like swinging a tennis racket or swinging a baseball bat or punching, sorry to say, but all of those activities, you're expecting that the effort is in the arms. But in fact, the more that the pelvis is able to get mobilized around those movements, actually, the more powerful they are. So, and this has been found in, I don't know, hundreds of different studies. So yes, those studies were looking at swinging a bat or swinging a tennis racket, but the same is true for everything that we do. It's just showing up a general biomechanical principle of movement.
Great, thank you, David. A couple of questions have come in. One is, I had a traumatic delivery of my first child 14 years ago. Since then, I have had pain in my lower back and down my leg. This pain increased with my next 2 childbirths. Will this workshop help with that?
Well, I can't make you guarantees, but I would say that I would be very, very positive and hopeful that the lessons will help you. Now, why? Because especially in the last few months of caring of an unborn child, is yet unborn, those are the mechanically, anatomically stressful times in the pregnancy. We have gained a lot of weight. The baby is growing and is weighing as much as it will during the pregnancy. And so I'm making all sorts of adaptations to that increased weight, usually leaning backwards. And most often, and if you think of being pregnant and the way that if 8 months, 9 months, the way that one walks, or maybe better to say waddles, do you understand the physics of the problem just at an intuitive level? Well, when that happens, we usually, the more work we have to do, the more likely we tend to exaggerate our bias. In other words, if I'm, let's say I'm a little askew and my shoulders and my chest are turned to the left. Now, I get along just fine, but if you ask me to carry 50 pounds, 30 pounds even of weight, then that bias gets exaggerated, and that stress increases because of that little bit of bias, the mechanical stress of that weight. Now, if this isn't highlighted for me, or I don't have an understanding of it, or if my physical therapist or doesn't have an understanding of it, well, then I continue to have that more exaggerated bias, and that causes mechanical stress. Now, what does that mean, mechanical stress? That means that my spine, the wear and tear in my spine, it's too asymmetrical. One side is working harder than the other. It means, again, like as I referred to earlier, means that there's more pressure over one hip joint than the other. And so the reason I'm confident that these lessons will help you is that I guarantee that these lessons will improve the symmetry of how you use your pelvis in relationship to any movement. And that's an extremely fundamental and therapeutic, will have a therapeutic effect. So again, the more symmetrical is the use of my pelvis, the more symmetrical is the wear and tear on my spine, the more symmetrical is the pressure in my hip joints, and you'll see that then your arms, the symmetry of the movement of your arms is improved. And if I may, unless you feel we have too many questions, that bias is general. There's never, it's anything that is asymmetrical affects the whole of myself. I don't want to say we all must be symmetrical, but our structure and our musculature is healthiest, is better functioning the more we are biased toward symmetry. So I want to extend the meaning of that and show you how something at the center of ourselves actually is affecting our senses. Because if my pelvis is tilted, let's say, 5 degrees to the left habitually, and I tell you, oh, I have back pain for the last 13 years, 14 years, whatever it was. Well, I immediately understand that there's also an asymmetry even though you haven't reported to me anything about pain in your neck, I know that there's asymmetrical use of the muscles of your neck and your eyes and your ears, your sense of hearing, because that bias, what was it? I said 5 degrees to the left. I have to counterbalance. I have to counter that by shifting my head and eyes to the right. And that is creating a twist in my spine, a twist in my neck. So you get the picture, I think. I hope.
Very helpful, David. Thank you. Not a question, but a comment we got from Susan Davis, who writes in to say that she is recovering from a right-sided pawn stroke, and she comes to many of our classes, and she's excited for the workshop.
Oh, sweet. Thank you, Susan.
Yeah, happy to have you, Susan. Can't wait. And Kelly writes in to say,
may I
oh,
say
sorry, go
something?
ahead, please.
Yeah. Which taking off on what Susan said, all of the lessons that we'll be doing can be adapted to sitting in a chair. And we will have 1 or 2 people demonstrating the lessons while sitting in a chair. And so even if you cannot be comfortable lying on the floor, you'll find that you can adapt. We'll adapt the lessons for you, or we'll help you adapt the lessons.
Wonderful. Thank you for bringing that up, David. And maybe we could also address the possibility of people who may not be comfortable for the whole duration of the workshop, catching up with the lessons as they are posted into their library, and that they can access the recordings after the workshop is ended.
Yeah, I think that's one of the more user-friendly aspects of what we're trying to do at Feldenkrais Access, which is to make the lessons, the workshops, the classes available to you 24/7. And that means that if, of course, to do lessons all day long, or to participate in something all day long is not necessarily feasible for everyone. And so you can come, or you may get fatigued after the third lesson of the day. So you can always stop the workshop. In fact, I would encourage people to stop when you're tired and come back to the rest of the workshop later, or the rest of the day at a later time. Excuse me.
Also, the interface where the lessons are hosted, it makes it possible for the students to ask a question of you at any time, which you answer as you're available, but they can always ask a question, which I think is a wonderful feature of the interface as well.
That's right. I just want to restate that if you're doing the lessons a week or a month later or a year later, you can send in a question.
Great. Thank you, David. And Kelly writes in, I have SI joint dysfunction. Will this help?
Well, I don't know exactly what you mean by dysfunction, and because one can experience a sacroiliac, just for everybody else who doesn't know what SI means. There's many ways of experiencing sacroiliac pain. Now, of course, when moving your pelvis, you're moving your sacrum. So, and that is how they're meant to work, and they're profoundly attached to each other through ligaments, and I would suspect, again, most often, not every time, sometimes things are a result of a very acute injury or accident. But I would say that 80% of the time, the discomforts that we feel, the pain that we feel, is a result of overuse. Back to what I was talking about earlier, about when we have a chronic bias in a particular direction, and our body, you could say, was not created for this kind of differential use of ourselves, where one part of ourselves is getting excessive wear and tear, where the ligaments on one side of the pelvis are pulling the sacrum differentially from the other side, so that the position of the sacrum is not, what should we say, equitable and symmetrical in relationship to our pelvis. So, which would then bring one part of the sacrum maybe too close to the pelvis, increasing the potential for, again, for inflammation, which would give you pain. So, yeah, I think a lot of our difficulties are improved. I understand the difficulties are particular, and they can be very uncomfortable, but I think many of these difficulties are improved with an indirect approach. It's not really indirect, but it's saying my pain is in my sacrum, and so let's go, I don't know, let's go massage your sacrum, let's go push here, because that's, of course, the most basic way of thinking is If I feel the pain in my sacrum, I feel the pain, then the problem must be there. The answer to the problem must be there. But in fact, if you improve the way the whole self is used, your whole self is used, then you'll find that these particular places, that the problem also improves.
We have another question on YouTube from Sharana, who writes, "Thank you very much, David, for offering this wonderful class. I have a very forward pelvis, and I just cannot move it where it needs to be. Will this class help my awareness of my forward pelvis?"
Well, without hesitation, yes. Without hesitation, yes. Now, we have to unpack, and we probably will in the workshop. We have to unpack what you mean exactly by forward. Is it that the whole pelvis has come forward? Is it the top of the pelvis is tilted forward? That's most often what one might mean. But also the pubic bone can be tilted forward, or forward and up, forward and down. So I think if your pelvis being tilted forward is causing you discomfort, it's causing you pain, then I feel confident you'll be helped. You will feel helped. On the other hand, if somebody has told you, if somebody has given you the idea that your pelvis is tilted this way or that way too much, and you don't have any pain, then I would be suspicious of what that person has said. Because if anything is true, it's that we vary from one another. None of us are exactly the same. None of us. Our organs are not in exactly the same places. In our brain, our structure of our brain is slightly different, one person from the other. We are all, the variability is the truest thing you can say when you look at us. So what may be for another person a forward tilt of the pelvis may be the healthiest position for someone else. So I don't know any other information about your situation, but I hope that was useful.
Great, thank you, David. And another question that we have is from someone who's writing about, well, I'll just read it. "I have difficulty with relaxing my breath. I find that when I try to relax my breath, it makes me more anxious. Will this workshop include work with the breath that could help with that?"
We'll definitely be working with breathing and seeing how different waves of breathing affect the movement of our pelvis. And also you'll see an improvement in these lessons in the extent of the movement of your diaphragm. So the diaphragm is our most important and largest muscle of respiration. And oftentimes when parts of our pelvis, the musculature of our pelvis that attaches to our pelvis are too contracted, then it inhibits the ability of our diaphragm to work. And in that inhibition of the movement of our diaphragm, you can feel restrictions in your breathing. So yes, we'll absolutely be working with that.
Great, thank you, David. Those are all the questions that we have right now. Would you like to say some more about the origination of your ideas about the workshop?
Sure, I'll say a little about the origination of the lesson by Dr. Feldenkrais. I understand that the term pelvic clock is in wide use in other domains. And I just want to say that Dr. Feldenkrais came up with this term, probably in the 1960s, not to date him, but and I don't know about those other ways of using the term pelvic clock, but so as you know, the part of Dr. Feldenkrais's background was that he in fact was an athlete, and he was then in from his midlife on, he was a martial artist. So and so the use of the pelvis as the center of power is very, very pivotal in all the martial arts, in Tai Chi, in Judo, Aikido, Karate. These masters understood. And so rather, I think for Feldenkrais, he of course approached these ideas from the point of view of a physicist, looking at the kinesiological, in other words, the body, how the musculature is used in motion. And this was consumed his outside of physics life, still applying his thinking as a physicist. And so that term, the pelvic clock, was originated with him and was very important to him. And what we're going to be doing in this workshop is seeing how powerful the idea is, and how there is nothing that we do, even if we're sitting, there is nothing that we do that doesn't involve the participation of our pelvis. Now, of course, the pelvis is what? It's the center of ourselves, isn't it? It's the center of ourselves. And as we said earlier, the most powerful muscles of ourselves are attached to that. So a small movement of our pelvis has a from a biomechanical point of view, has a ripple effect throughout our whole self. So if I keep my pelvis tight, if I keep my abdominal muscles tight, that restricts, unnecessarily tight, that restricts the movement of my pelvis. It minimizes the ability of my pelvis to improve. And so to the extent that my pelvis can participate, then everything becomes lighter. All of me becomes lighter. My breathing, the movement of my arms, my head, my neck, my eyes. So the whole, it is at its root, you'll find that the lessons are a holistic approach to holistic in thinking, holistic in action approach to improving ourselves and reducing our aches and pains and movements where we feel a sense of difficulty.
Great. We are out of time, but we got one more question. So I wonder if you
absolutely
care to address it. Again, from Sharana, who follows up. Thank you for your answer, David. How will this class help with posture exactly?
Well, again, exactly is that if my pelvis, if I find through these lessons, I find a neutral for my pelvis, not being held back or forward, but neutral, then you find that the reciprocity between the muscles of the front of ourselves, called the flexor muscles in general, and the muscles of our back becomes, that reciprocal relationship becomes healthier. And not that you need to do something. It's that now the pelvis, as again, the place where these big, powerful muscles are attached, you can imagine if my pelvis is, let's say, too far back, it's pulling all of me back. And then my whole self is having to work very hard to stay upright because there's this backward pull. And ditto, if my pelvis is too far forward, I'm pitched forward. So if anything, the posture will improve because we've found your neutral for your pelvis, for these powerful muscles of yourself, not somebody else's neutral, but your neutral. And so you are the most important person in terms of the lessons. And of course, this is true for each person, not just for you. But in this way, we find what is for us harmonious posture, harmonious movement.
Wonderful. It sounds exciting. Can't wait. Just to remind everyone that the early bird deadline ends today. So please take advantage of that and register so that you can join David on this journey of discovering your neutral for your pelvis. Anything you'd like to say before we close, David?
No, thank you very much. They're great questions. And I'm even more excited now.
Great. See you there.
All right. Cheers.